The story focuses on a small family of 3 living in LaGrange, Ohio. Curtis, his wife Samantha, and their mute daughter Hannah. Curtis works at a mining operation and has been putting aside money so Hannah can eventually receive a cochlear implant. Life is steady for them until one day Curtis notices huge storm clouds gathering while he stands in the backyard. Within moments, a tornado forms and heads toward the house. When light rain begins, he realizes the droplets aren't water but motor oil. Before he understands what's happening, their normally calm dog suddenly becomes hostile and attacks him. Curtis instantly wakes up, realizing the event was only a nightmare. Even though it felt extremely real, he brushes it off and continues with his morning. During breakfast, he can't shake the discomfort from the dream and immediately pulls Hannah away from the dog. He then asks Samantha to keep the dog outside whenever he isn't around. She asks for a reason, but he avoids answering and leaves for work. Curtis's closest colleague, Stewart, also struggles financially, so the two bond over shared challenges. At the site, the workers are told to limit their breaks since many missed time because of a large storm the week before. The constant bad weather has everyone stressed, and Curtis assumes this might be what triggered his nightmare. After finishing work, he heads to Hannah's school for a meeting. On the way home, another harsh storm arrives out of nowhere. The rain looks like motor oil again, and Curtis ends up losing control of the car, crashing into a tree while Hannah panics beside him. When he opens his eyes, the dream intensifies. A group of strangers surrounds the crashed car and tries to force their way inside. The windows shatter as they pull Hannah away from him. Curtis screams in horror and then wakes up again. It turns out to be another one of his disturbingly vivid dreams, and this time he realizes something is truly wrong. Samantha notices his heavy breathing and asks what's going on, but he refuses to tell her, not wanting to cause her worry. Instead of seeking medical help, Curtis decides to handle everything alone and becomes fixated on preparing for what he believes might be real warnings. He starts making changes around the property, beginning with building a fence to keep the dog contained in case it ever becomes aggressive like in his visions. It calms him a little, but he still believes the real threat is the storm. While looking for a place of safety, he discovers an old storm shelter in the backyard. It has been locked for years, but he eventually finds the key and opens it. The space is small and dusty, but in his mind, it would be the safest area if the events from his dreams ever occur. That night, Samantha confronts him about his unusual behavior and seems upset that the dog has been left outside again. Curtis barely responds, too focused on watching the weather updates on TV. The next morning, he wakes up to heavy rainfall. When he walks into the living room, he sees Hannah staring out the window, and a strange man standing in the backyard staring back. Curtis grabs Hannah as the stranger tries to open their door. The storm worsens, shaking the house violently, and Curtis begins to fear they may not survive. Just as everything seems hopeless, he wakes up once more. It's his third nightmare, and this one is so overwhelming that he loses control in his sleep. Samantha enters the room and asks if he's okay, but Curtis, embarrassed and overwhelmed, pushes her away. His reaction leads to tension and arguments between them. Even after all this, Curtis refuses to admit he may be dealing with a mental health issue. Instead of going to a doctor, he checks out a mental health book from the library. On his way home, he also fills a cart with canned food, intending to stock the storm shelter. Later that day, Samantha hosts a family brunch and becomes irritated when Curtis arrives late. He has been missing church, falling behind at work, and isolating himself due to his obsession with the oily storms. That night, Samantha waits hours for him in bed before falling asleep. During that time, Curtis is still outside, organizing food supplies in the shelter, fully consumed by his fears. Curtis has barely slept for an entire week, and the exhaustion starts affecting his health. Because of this, he finally decides to visit a doctor the following day. He explains only the basic issues and avoids mentioning the disturbing dreams. The doctor simply prescribes medication to help him rest. Meanwhile, Samantha meets with their insurance agent, who happily informs her that Hannah's cochlear implant request has been accepted. Their daughter will soon receive the surgery that will allow her to hear. Samantha rushes home to share the news with Curtis, and both of them are filled with relief, briefly restoring peace within the household. The following morning feels even brighter. Curtis wakes up refreshed, crediting the medication for giving him a full night's sleep. But the calm doesn't last long. Curtis suddenly hears what sounds like a raging storm. He immediately asks Stewart if he hears it too, but the sky is completely clear, with no clouds in sight. This time he is fully awake, yet the sound keeps pounding in his ears. The anxiety overwhelms him so intensely that he ends up getting sick and decides to return home. Later, he visits his mother, hoping to talk about her past mental struggles. She had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in her 30s, and he fears he might be facing the same condition. She describes the frightening episodes she once experienced, such as mysterious whispers that tormented her throughout the night. Since she eventually recovered, Curtis hopes his situation might also improve with time. The next day, Curtis heads to the bank to request a large loan to rebuild the storm shelter. Taking the loan places Hannah's upcoming surgery in danger since they are already struggling financially, but Curtis believes he is making the right decision. In his mind, preparing for the storm is more important than anything else, as he's convinced it will strike eventually and that the shelter is their only chance of survival. Later, he decides to visit a therapist and finally speaks openly about what he has been experiencing. She manages to get him to discuss his nightmares for the first time, which temporarily eases some of his stress, though he becomes frustrated that therapy doesn't instantly fix his issues. On his way home, a real thunderstorm rolls in. Curtis panics, unsure whether the event is real or another hallucination. He looks at Samantha resting in the back seat and sees her sleeping peacefully, which confirms that his mind is tricking him again. The night eventually passes, and Curtis gets back to working on the storm shelter. Stewart helps by bringing extra tools from work, unknowingly risking his own job. Samantha, meanwhile, becomes increasingly frightened and frustrated, unaware of the loan and overwhelmed by Curtis's growing obsession. That night, she pushes him to finally explain himself. Curtis still hides the truth about the nightmares, but confesses that he took out a loan, leaving Samantha furious. She cannot accept secrets when it concerns their daughter's health, and she becomes devastated at the possibility that he might have jeopardized Hannah's surgery. The thought of ending the marriage even crosses her mind. Once she calms down, they agree to talk again the following day. Desperate for rest, Curtis takes twice the prescribed dose of his medication, assuming it might help. Instead, he suffers a severe reaction later that night. Samantha wakes up in a panic to see him vomiting blood and convulsing. She tries calling for medical help while Curtis insists he's fine, but when assistance finally arrives, he sends them away, claiming he has recovered. Samantha realizes she can no longer ignore what is happening. She demands honesty, forcing Curtis to finally admit everything: the nightmares, the excessive medication, and how deeply his fears had taken hold. He even reveals that he once dreamed about Stewart harming him during the storm, which contributed to his earlier panic. Samantha softens and promises to support him through whatever he is facing. The next morning, Curtis asks his boss for a shift change because he no longer wants to work alongside Stewart. The new arrangement disrupts Stewart's schedule and reduces time he can spend with his family. Curtis feels guilty for causing trouble for someone who helped him, but his paranoia convinces him he must eliminate anything he thinks could become a threat. Even after all these changes, the nightmares continue and only become more intense. In one terrifying dream, Curtis sees Samantha motionless in the kitchen, staring directly at him. She appears drenched as if caught in a storm, and he becomes convinced she intends to harm him. The next morning, he flinches when she tries to touch him, making his distrust painfully clear. He no longer knows who in his life is safe to rely on. Because of this growing fear, he ends up missing multiple workdays. His boss eventually visits their house and discovers the storm shelter filled with tools taken from the worksite, supplied by Stewart. That discovery becomes the final offense, and Curtis is fired immediately. Losing his job plunges the family deeper into financial trouble, all caused by Curtis's uncontrollable fixation on the storm he believes is coming. An enraged Samantha strikes Curtis across the face and orders him to secure the needed money, no matter what it takes. Their yearly beach vacation is immediately called off so they can put every possible dollar toward the surgery. Soon after, the family attends a church gathering, hoping that being surrounded by familiar faces will help ease their stress. While there, Curtis runs into Stewart, who was fired because of Curtis's actions. Stewart is drowning in his own financial and family struggles, and seeing Curtis appear more stable than him only fuels his frustration. He has been telling others that Curtis has lost his grip on reality and requires psychiatric help. Their unresolved resentment finally erupts, and the two end up in a physical altercation. Curtis angrily lashes out at everyone present, accusing them of ignoring the signs of an upcoming oil storm and insisting his family will be the only ones prepared. Horrified and shaken, Samantha takes the family back home. Later that night, an emergency siren blares, jolting the entire household awake. Curtis believes the moment he has been predicting has finally arrived. In panic and darkness, the family rushes into the storm shelter he built and shuts themselves inside. As dawn breaks, the rumbling outside intensifies, making Curtis certain he was right all along. Samantha, however, pleads with him to clear his mind and open the door. When he finally unlocks it, they step out into a perfectly calm morning. The storm that passed overnight was nothing more than a small one, leaving behind minimal damage that neighbors are already cleaning up. Seeing this, Curtis is struck by the realization that his fear and paranoia nearly tore his family apart. Samantha, wanting to help him rebuild, decides to move forward with compassion. She takes him to a qualified psychiatrist who begins treating Curtis's condition properly. Since the shelter symbolizes his fixation, the doctor suggests that Curtis take some time away, perhaps a short trip, to reset his mind. Samantha agrees, feeling the family desperately needs a break after the exhausting month they've endured. She reinstates their annual beach getaway, arranging a week-long trip. In the following scene, Curtis is shown happily playing with Hannah near the shoreline. The absence of nightmares has softened him, and his lighter, calmer demeanor reflects that. But while they play, Hannah suddenly stops laughing and quietly signals a storm. Curtis turns to look, and in the distance, a colossal storm, far bigger than anything he imagined. begins to form. It moves toward the city with undeniable force. Unsure if it is reality or another illusion, Curtis glances at Samantha and realizes from her expression that she sees it as well. The story concludes with the family preparing to leave the beach immediately, heading home before the massive oil storm overtakes everything in its path. Like and subscribe for more recaps like this.